Freezing boy hugs baby sister, until a rich CEO stops and says, "I'm taking you with me." One evening Richard Cole, a rich CEO, was returning home from his office. The street was quiet. Suddenly, his eyes fell on a boy holding a small girl in his arms. They were standing by the side of the road, shivering from the cold. Richard stopped the car. He stepped out and walked towards them. "Are you alright?" Richard asked. The boy looked up, trembling. "She's freezing. I don't know where to go." Richard immediately took off his coat and wrapped it around them. "I'm taking you with me," he said. The boy nodded and Richard helped them into the car. Richard drove through the quiet streets, the car's heater humming softly. Ethan, the boy, sat in the back seat holding his sister tightly. The baby girl, Lily, was still shivering despite the warmth of the car. Richard glanced at them through the rearview mirror. Ethan's eyes were filled with uncertainty. He kept glancing out the window, looking as if he was trying to figure out what to do next. Richard's mind raced. He had no idea how these kids ended up alone in the cold. But one thing was clear. He couldn't just drop them off somewhere. They needed help. As they neared Richard's mansion, he slowed the car and turned into the long driveway. The large gates opened automatically, and he drove up to the front door. The house looked as empty and quiet as always, but tonight, it felt different. Richard stopped the car and turned off the engine. He got out first and opened the back door, helping Ethan and Lily out of the car. Ethan looked around, his eyes wide as he took in the massive house. "Where are we?" Ethan asked, his voice full of awe and confusion. "This is my home," Richard replied gently. "You're safe here." Ethan hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. Richard led them inside, his footsteps echoing in the large, empty hall. The warmth of the house enveloped them, and Ethan seemed to relax a little. Richard called for his housekeeper, Mrs. Clark, to come and help. Within minutes, she appeared, her eyes widening when she saw the children. "Richard, who are these children?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "They're staying with us for tonight," Richard said. "Please help them get settled." The Mrs. Clark didn't question him. She smiled and nodded. "Of course, sir. Come with me, children." She guided them to a guest room, where Ethan and Lily could rest for the night. Richard stood at the doorway, watching as the housekeeper tucked them into bed. Lily was fast asleep within minutes, but Ethan sat up, his eyes wide, staring at the unfamiliar surroundings. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, looking at Richard. Richard nodded. "You're safe now." He stayed there for a moment longer before turning to leave. The night had taken an unexpected turn, but Richard knew he had made the right choice. He couldn't abandon them. For now, they would stay with him, and together, they would figure out what to do next. The next morning, Richard woke early. He was in his study when Mrs. Clark came in, a worried look on her face. "Sir, the boy is asking questions," she said. Richard stood up. "What kind of questions?" "About his parents. About where they are. He's scared." Richard felt a pang in his chest. He hadn't expected them to ask so soon. "I'll talk to him." He walked to the guest room where Ethan was sitting on the bed, looking out the window. The boy turned when Richard entered. "Are you okay?" Richard asked. Ethan nodded, but his eyes were full of questions. "Where's my mom and dad? Are we going home soon?" Richard's heart sank. He had no answers for the boy. "Ethan, I'm not sure where your parents are. But I'll help you find them." Ethan's face showed a mix of relief and worry. "What about Lily?" "She's safe," Richard assured him. "And you're safe here too." Ethan nodded but said nothing more. Richard knew the questions would keep coming, but for now he had no answers. All he could do was keep them safe. Richard spent the next few days making sure Ethan and Lily were settled in. They were well taken care of, but the questions from Ethan didn't stop. He asked about his parents every day, and each time, Richard struggled to find the right words. One evening, as Richard was finishing work in his office, Ethan knocked on the door. Richard looked up and saw the boy standing in the doorway, holding Lily in his arms. "Can we talk?" Ethan asked, his voice hesitant. Richard gestured for him to come in. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Ethan walked in, his eyes searching Richard's face. "I don't want to be a burden," he said quietly. "But I need to know the truth. Where are my parents?" Richard paused. He hadn't been prepared for this question. Ethan, I wish I could give you answers. But I promise you, I'll help you find them. Ethan sat down. His face full of sadness. I remember. Something happened. Something bad. Richard's heart tightened. He had suspected there was more to their story. But hearing Ethan say it out loud made it all feel real. He sat down beside the boy. What do you remember? Richard asked gently. Ethan looked at him with wide eyes. I don't know. I just remember being scared. There was an accident, a loud noise, and then nothing. Richard's mind raced. Could it be possible? Could Ethan and Lily have been involved in something more than just being abandoned? He had no answers yet, but he was determined to find them. I'll do everything I can to help you, Richard said, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You're not alone. Ethan nodded, but his face remained troubled. But what if I never find them? Richard didn't have an answer. All he could do was promise the boy that he would try, no matter how difficult the journey. The days turned into weeks, but the uncertainty never left Richard's mind. Every day, Ethan and Lily were under his care. And Richard couldn't help but feel a growing sense of responsibility. The boy's questions about his parents were constant, and each time Richard answered, the worry in his eyes deepened. Ethan had started to show signs of becoming more withdrawn. He spent hours sitting by the window, gazing out at the world beyond the mansion. Richard knew that the boy was trying to make sense of everything, but how could he? The only thing Richard could offer was his promise. He would find Ethan's parents. It was a rainy afternoon when Richard decided it was time to search for answers. He had been putting it off, afraid of what he might uncover, but Ethan needed to know the truth, even if it was painful. Richard called his private investigator Jason, and told him to meet him at the mansion. Jason was a man of few words, but his sharp mind and attention to detail had helped Richard with many of his business dealings. Today, however, it was not business that brought them together. Jason arrived around 5 p.m., just as the rain started to pour harder. Richard met him in the study. Any progress? Richard asked as he led Jason to the back of the mansion, where the children were playing quietly in the living room. Jason shook his head. Not much. But I've managed to get some information on a possible lead. There's an address that matches the name of a woman who might be related to Ethan and Lily. Richard's heart skipped a beat. Do you think they're connected? It's possible. But I won't know for sure until we check it out. Richard nodded. He knew they couldn't waste time. Let's go. They left the mansion and got into Jason's car. The rain made the drive slower than usual, but Richard didn't mind. His mind was elsewhere, focused on the possibility that they might find the answers they had been searching for. The address Jason had found was not far. Just a small apartment complex on the outskirts of town. As they drove through the dark streets, Richard couldn't help but think about how much had changed in his life since meeting Ethan and Lily. He had gone from being a successful CEO, focused only on his business, to someone responsible for the well-being of 2 lost children. It had been overwhelming at times, but it had also brought a new sense of purpose. When they reached the apartment complex, it was quiet. The rain had let up, leaving only the sound of dripping water as they parked near the entrance. Richard and Jason got out of the car and walked toward the building. The place looked old and rundown, but it had an air of familiarity to it, as if something important had happened here. Jason led the way up the stairs to the second floor, stopping in front of a door at the end of the hallway. He knocked twice. No answer. Jason knocked again. Louder this time. Still nothing. Richard felt a knot tighten in his stomach. What if they were too late? What if the woman they were looking for had already left? Jason glanced back at Richard, his expression unreadable. We may have to force our way in. Richard hesitated. He wasn't a man who took risks lightly. But in that moment, he didn't care. He needed answers. Do it, Richard said. Jason pulled out a small toolkit from his bag and quickly worked on the lock. Within seconds, the door creaked open. They stepped inside. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished. There were pictures on the walls, a few pieces of furniture, and a single bed in the corner. The place was tidy, but there was a sense of abandonment in the air, as if the woman who lived there had left in a hurry. Richard's eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of the woman, or anything that might connect her to Ethan and Lily. He walked over to the small desk by the window and picked up a few papers scattered on top. Most of it was junk mail, but one envelope caught his attention. It was addressed to a woman named Clara Miller. Clara Miller, Richard whispered. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. He turned the envelope over, noticing the return address. It was a hospital, the same one where he had been treated years ago after a car accident. Jason moved toward the bedroom and opened the closet. Inside, he found a few items of clothing. Nothing too personal. But there was something in the back corner that caught his eye. A small box, covered in dust. He pulled it out and opened it. Inside, there were photographs. Richard's heart raced as he looked at them. The first photo was of a woman holding a baby. Ethan, as a baby. And beside her stood a man who looked strangely familiar. It was hard to make out his face clearly, but Richard recognized the resemblance. Is this Clara Miller? Richard asked. Jason nodded. It looks like her. And that man? I'm not sure who he is, but he might be connected to Ethan. Richard's mind raced. The clues were starting to piece together. But there were still so many questions. Why had they been left on the streets? What had happened to their parents? He looked at the pictures once more. We need to find her. Jason closed the box and tucked it under his arm. I'll make some calls. We'll track her down. As they left the apartment and returned to the car, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer to the truth. But with each answer more questions arose. The mystery of Ethan and Lily's past was far from over. The following days were filled with uncertainty and a sense of urgency. The discovery of Clara Miller's name had given Richard a lead. But it had only raised more questions. Who was the man in the photograph with her? What happened to Ethan and Lily's parents? And most importantly, why had they been left alone in the streets? Richard knew that finding Clara Miller was crucial. If she had any connection to the children, she might hold the key to unlocking their past. He called Jason early the next morning. We need to find Clara Miller, Richard said, his voice steady but urgent. She has to know something about what happened. Jason replied quickly. I've already put some feelers out. I'll find her, Richard. Don't worry. Richard hung up the phone and walked to the living room, where Ethan and Lily were sitting on the floor, playing with toys. Lily's laughter filled the room, a welcome sound in the otherwise tense atmosphere. Ethan sat next to her, his eyes occasionally drifting to the window, as if he was waiting for something. Richard couldn't help but wonder what was going on in the boy's mind. Every time he looked at him, he saw that same worry in his eyes, the fear of not knowing where his parents were, or if he'd ever see them again. Richard sat down next to Ethan. The boy looked up at him, his eyes searching for answers. Are you okay? Richard asked, his voice gentle. Ethan nodded but didn't speak. Richard could see the effort it took for the boy to push his emotions aside. It wasn't easy for him. And Richard could tell the weight of the situation was wearing on him. I'm doing my best to find your parents, Richard said, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. We're getting closer. Ethan's face lit up slightly. You are. Richard nodded. I found some things that might lead us to them. We'll find them together. Ethan smiled faintly, but Richard could tell that the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The boy was still holding on to hope. But it was clear he was also beginning to doubt if they would ever find the truth. As the days passed, Jason worked tirelessly to track down Clara Miller. He had called every contact he could think of, searched through public records, and even reached out to people who might know her. But every lead turned into a dead end. Richard's frustration grew with each passing hour. He had promised Ethan that he would find his parents, and yet the trail seemed to be growing colder. One afternoon, Jason called Richard with an update. I found her, Jason said, his voice filled with relief. Clara Miller is alive. But she's not exactly where we expected her to be. Richard's heart skipped a beat. Where is she? She's living in a small town about 2 hours away. Jason replied. I managed to track down her address. But there's something else. Richard. She's been in and out of hospitals for the last few years. Something happened to her. I'm not sure what. but it's connected to the accident. Richard's mind raced. The mention of an accident confirmed his suspicions. He knew the accident had something to do with Ethan and Lily's situation. But what had happened to Clara? And why had she been so hard to find? We need to go to her, Richard said, determination in his voice. I want to meet her. Find out what she knows. I'll set up a meeting, Jason replied. I'll be there in an hour. We can drive over together. Richard hung up the phone and turned toward Ethan, who had been listening in on the conversation. The boy's eyes were filled with hope, but also fear. We're going to meet someone who might know where your parents are, Richard said softly. Ethan looked up at him, his face a mix of excitement and doubt. Do you really think she knows? Do you think she'll help us? I think she might, Richard replied. But we won't know for sure until we talk to her. Ethan nodded. But Richard could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He couldn't blame the boy. After all the confusion and dead ends, it was hard for anyone to keep believing. An hour later, Richard and Jason were in the car, driving through the rain-soaked streets toward the small town. The drive was long and quiet. Each of them lost in their own thoughts. Richard couldn't help but think about the journey ahead. This was the closest they had come to finding answers. But he knew that it might not be what they expected. When they arrived at Clara Miller's address, Richard felt his heart race. The house was modest. Nothing like the mansion he had opened to Ethan and Lily. It was a small cottage with a weathered roof, tucked away at the edge of town. The front yard was overgrown. And the windows were covered with thick curtains. It looked abandoned, as if no one had lived there in years. Jason knocked on the door, and after a long pause, the door creaked open. A woman stood there, her face tired and worn. Her eyes were full of sadness, but there was also a flicker of recognition when she saw Richard. Can I help you? Clara asked, her voice weak. Richard stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Clara Miller, he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She nodded slowly, but there was no surprise in her eyes. Yes, that's me. What do you want? We need to talk, Richard said. About your children. The Clara's face changed in an instant. Her eyes widened with fear, and she stepped back, her hand reaching for the doorframe to steady herself. I don't know what you mean, Clara stammered. I don't have any children. Richard's heart sank. He had been prepared for many things, but not this. He looked at Jason, who stood behind him just as confused. You have 2 children, Ethan and Lily, Richard said softly. They were found alone on the street. Clara's face went pale, and she stepped back further, shaking her head. No, that's not possible. Richard's mind raced. What was going on? Why was Clara denying everything? Clara stood at the door, her face pale, trembling as she stared at Richard and Jason. She had not invited them in, and there was an unmistakable fear in her eyes. I don't have children, Clara repeated, her voice shaking, as if she were trying to convince herself more than anyone else. Her hands gripped the doorframe so tightly that Richard could see her knuckles turning white. Jason glanced at Richard, a silent question in his eyes. Richard's heart pounded. This was not what he had expected. After all the leads, all the searching, this was the woman who might hold the answers. And yet she was denying everything. Clara, Richard said, his voice firm but gentle, we know you have 2 children. Their names are Ethan and Lily. We found them. They were alone in the street, cold and hungry. You have to remember them. Clara's face faltered, her expression shifting from fear to something deeper. Regret. Perhaps, or a sense of loss. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a mask of indifference. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I've been through too much. Please, just go. Richard stepped forward, his instincts screaming that there was something more here than she was letting on. He could see the pain in her eyes, the walls she had built up around herself. Whatever had happened, it had clearly taken a toll on her. I'm not leaving, Richard said softly, but with resolve. We need to talk. I'm not here to hurt you, Clara, I'm here to help you and to help them. He paused, his gaze steady on hers. Ethan and Lily need answers. They need to know what happened to their parents. Clara's shoulders slumped, her facade crumbling. She stepped back from the door, almost as if she had given up, and gestured for Richard and Jason to enter. Richard hesitated for a moment before following her inside. The house was small, the air heavy with dust. There was a strange silence to the place, as if it had not seen life in years. Clara led them to a small living room and motioned for them to sit. She collapsed into a chair, her hands wringing in her lap. Richard could see that she was struggling to control her emotions. And it was clear that whatever had happened to her, it was not easy to talk about. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have told you sooner." Richard sat down across from her. Jason remained standing, his eyes scanning the room, alert to any details that might help them understand the situation. Clara took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "It's been so long," Clara began, her voice shaky. "Ethan and Lily, they were my world. But I couldn't protect them. I couldn't save them." Richard listened carefully, waiting for her to continue. "What happened?" he asked softly. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, as if reliving a memory she wished she could forget. "There was an accident," she said quietly. "A car crash. My husband, he didn't survive. I was hurt too. I couldn't take care of them after that. I couldn't even take care of myself." Her voice broke as she spoke, the weight of her words sinking in. Richard's mind raced. The pieces were starting to fit together. He had suspected an accident, but hearing Clara speak about it made everything feel too real. He had no idea how bad it had been for her, or how deep the scars ran. "What happened to Ethan and Lily?" Jason asked, his voice calm but insistent. Clara looked up at them, her eyes filled with pain. "They were put in foster care. I tried to get them back, but I couldn't. The system, it wasn't kind to me. They said I wasn't stable enough, that I wasn't fit to be a mother." Richard could hear the bitterness in her voice, and he understood why. The system had failed her, and in turn, it had failed her children. He could see that she had been through hell trying to hold everything together, but now it was clear, she had lost her children, her family, and perhaps even herself. "So, you gave up?" Jason's voice was sharp, but there was no malice in it, only an attempt to understand. Clara flinched at the question, but she nodded. "I didn't have a choice. I was broken. I couldn't fix myself, let alone take care of them. So I let go. I thought they were better off without me." Richard looked at Clara, his heart aching for her. He could see how much it hurt her to even talk about her children. "But you didn't forget them," he said gently. "You remember them. You know that they're still out there." The Clara nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I never stopped thinking about them. But I thought they were lost to me forever. I didn't want to hurt them by trying to find them. I was afraid I would only make things worse." Richard shook his head. "You didn't make things worse. You're still their mother, Clara. They need you. They want you to be in their lives again. I promise you, they won't turn away from you." Clara looked at him, her gaze filled with doubt. "How can you be so sure?" "Because they love you," Richard replied, his voice steady. "I see it in their eyes. They're scared. But they're not angry. They just want answers." Clara wiped away the tears that had started to fall. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough." Richard stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone, Clara. We're here to help you. We'll help you get back to them." Jason, who had been silent up until this point, spoke up. "We've already found them. They're safe with Richard. But the rest is up to you." Clara looked up at him, her expression shifting from doubt to something more hopeful. "You've found them?" Richard nodded. "Yes, and they're waiting for you." Clara stood up shakily, her knees giving way for a moment. But she steadied herself, her determination slowly returning. She had been lost for so long, but now, it seemed like she might have a chance to find her way back to the children she had lost. Clara stood still in the small living room, her mind racing with a mix of emotions. Richard's words had ignited something inside her. A spark of hope she hadn't felt in years. For so long, she had believed that her children were lost to her. That she was no longer fit to be their mother. But now, she stood here, with Richard and Jason, knowing that they were offering her a second chance. A chance to be with Ethan and Lily again. "I can't believe it," Clara whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. After all this time, I still have a chance. Richard stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. It's not going to be easy. There's a lot we need to work through. But if you want this, if you want to be in their lives, we can make it happen. Clara nodded, though she could still feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her shoulders. Could she really make things right? Could she truly be the mother Ethan and Lily deserved after all the mistakes she had made? I want to, she said, her voice steady now. I want to be their mother again. But I'm afraid they won't want me. I've been gone for so long. Jason, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke. You won't know until you try. You're their mother, Clara. They need to see you. They need to hear you say that you want to be there for them. Clara's hands trembled as she wiped her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to fix everything. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. Start with the truth. You're here now. That's all that matters. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had been afraid for so long. Afraid of facing the consequences of her past decisions, afraid that her children would never forgive her. But standing here, in this small house with Richard and Jason, she realized that she didn't have to carry that fear anymore. The past couldn't be undone. But the future was still within her reach. I'll go to them, she said suddenly, determination in her voice. I'll go to Ethan and Lily. I'll tell them everything. I'll make them understand. Jason gave a nod of approval. It's the first step. They need to hear from you, Clara. It will be hard. But it's the only way. Richard smiled, proud of her courage. We'll go with you. You don't have to do this alone. Clara's heart swelled with gratitude. She had been alone for so long, but now she realized she didn't have to be. She had people who cared. People who were willing to help her rebuild her family. After a moment, she took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. All right, she said, her voice stronger than before. Let's go. As they drove toward the mansion, Clara's mind was filled with a whirlwind of thoughts. What would Ethan think? Would he be angry with her? Would he hate her for abandoning him and Lily? She knew it wasn't going to be easy, but she had no choice. She had to face them. She had to make them understand. The drive felt long, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Richard drove in silence, glancing occasionally at Clara, who was staring out the window. Jason sat in the back, his presence calm and steady, a silent support for Clara's turbulent emotions. When they finally arrived at the mansion, Clara felt her stomach twist with nerves. The house looked as grand and empty as it always had. But this time, it didn't feel like just a house. It felt like the place where her future, her second chance, awaited her. Richard parked the car in front of the grand entrance, and they all stepped out. Clara hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The moment she had been both dreading and yearning for. Richard turned to her with a reassuring smile. They're inside. They've been waiting for you. Clara nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She walked up the steps, Jason and Richard following close behind. The front door opened, and Mrs. Clark, the housekeeper, appeared, her expression one of surprise and curiosity. Clara, you're here, she said, her voice soft. They've been asking about you. Clara nodded and smiled weakly. I'm here to see them. Mrs. Clark stepped aside, allowing Clara to enter. The house was quiet, and for a moment, it felt like a dream. It was surreal, being here, in this place that had once seemed so distant, so out of reach. But now it felt like a home. Her home, if she could make it that way again. As they walked down the hallway, Clara's heart raced. She could hear the faint sounds of children's laughter from the living room. The closer they got, the more intense the emotions became. What would she say? How would she explain everything? Finally, they reached the living room where Ethan and Lily were playing. Ethan was sitting on the floor, carefully building a tower out of blocks, while Lily sat beside him, watching with wide eyes. Clara stopped in the doorway, unable to move. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw them, her children, sitting there, so close but so far away. Ethan looked up first. His eyes met Clara's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan slowly stood up and took a tentative step forward. Clara's heart broke as she saw the uncertainty in his eyes. The fear that she had come too late. Mom. Ethan's voice was soft, almost as if he didn't believe it was really her. Clara's knees buckled. And she sank to the floor, her hands shaking. Ethan, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Ethan hesitated. Then stepped forward, his small hands reaching out for her. Are you really here? He asked, his voice full of wonder and doubt. Clara nodded. Tears falling freely now. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I swear. Ethan rushed into her arms and Clara wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly. Lily crawled over and joined them, and Clara pulled her into the embrace as well. The weight of all the lost years, all the missed moments, seemed to disappear in that instant. I love you both, Clara whispered through her tears. I'm so sorry. Ethan pulled back slightly, looking up at her with a small smile. We love you too, Mom. In that moment, Clara knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but it would be worth it. She had her children back. And now, together, they would rebuild the family that had been broken. The days following Clara's reunion with Ethan and Lily were filled with quiet moments of adjustment. For Clara, it was a delicate balance of hope and uncertainty. She had her children back, but there was still much to mend. There were the years lost to mistakes, to decisions she regretted, and to the painful separation that had torn them apart. But here, in the warmth of Richard's home, it was as if a new chapter was beginning. The mansion, which once felt too large, too empty, now felt alive with laughter and the sounds of children playing. Ethan and Lily were both still adjusting. But Clara could see the small changes in them. The cautious looks in their eyes when they saw her were slowly replaced with trust. Each day, the bond between them grew stronger, but the scars of their past were not so easily erased. Clara spent most of her time with Ethan and Lily, trying to make up for the years they had lost. She watched Ethan build his blocks, smiled as Lily tried to mimic him, and listened as they told her stories about their time apart. Sometimes, Clara would catch herself just staring at them, marveling at the fact that they were here, that they were hers again. But it wasn't all smooth. There were moments when Ethan would pull away, when Lily would cling to her, unwilling to let go. Clara understood. They were still hurt, still uncertain. The road to rebuilding their family would take time. But Clara was determined to make it work. She couldn't undo the past, but she could build a future that was better for them all. One evening, after dinner, Richard called Clara into his study. He had been keeping himself busy with work. But recently, he had made it a point to check in on Clara and the kids. When he invited her into the study, she wasn't sure what to expect. His tone had been different. Serious but not unkind. Sit down, Clara, Richard said, motioning to the chair across from his desk. Clara sat down slowly, her hands folded in her lap. She could sense that something was weighing on him, something important. I've been thinking about everything, Richard said, his gaze steady. About you. About Ethan and Lily. I want to help you. I know you've made a lot of progress, but it's not going to be easy. There's still a lot to figure out. Clara nodded, her heart heavy. She knew that Richard was right. Rebuilding her family, re-establishing her role as a mother. It was not something that could happen overnight. I'm here for you, Clara, Richard continued. But I think it's time we start planning for the future, for you and the kids. There's a lot you still need to work through, and I want to help however I can. Clara's mind raced. What did he mean by planning for the future? She didn't have a clear picture of what her future looked like, not yet. All she knew was that she wanted to be there for her children, to be the mother they needed. But beyond that, the future was unclear. Richard, i.e., Clara hesitated, not sure how to voice the thoughts swirling in her mind. I don't even know where to start. I want to give them everything, but I don't have the strength to do it all alone. Richard's eyes softened. You're not alone, Clara. I'm here, and I'll help you. I know it's been hard, but you've already taken the hardest step. You've come back for them. That's more than most people ever do. Clara felt tears well up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. Richard's words were like a lifeline, pulling her up from the overwhelming weight of self-doubt. I don't want to fail them. Clara whispered. I don't want to hurt them again. You won't? Richard said firmly. But you can't do this on your own. You need support. You need to give yourself the time and space to heal, to get back to where you need to be, so you can be the mother Ethan and Lily deserve. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I know I need to be strong for them. And you will be, Richard reassured her. But don't forget. You're allowed to be human. You're allowed to lean on others. You don't have to do it all alone. Clara nodded slowly. She was starting to understand. She had spent so much time trying to carry the weight of everything herself, believing that she had to be perfect, that she had to do it all. But the truth was, she didn't have to be perfect. She just had to keep moving forward, one step at a time, and be there for her children in the best way she could. Thank you, Clara said softly, her voice thick with emotion. For everything. I don't know what I would do without you. Richard smiled, standing up and walking around the desk to sit next to her. You're doing just fine, Clara. We'll figure this out together. Clara felt a warmth in her chest. A sense of peace that had been missing for so long. She wasn't alone anymore. She had people who cared about her. People who wanted to help her rebuild her life with Ethan and Lily. 2. The next few weeks were a mixture of progress and setbacks. Clara continued to bond with her children. But there were still moments of doubt, moments when Ethan and Lily would pull away, unsure of how to navigate their new reality. But Clara was patient. She knew it would take time for them to trust her again, for them to heal from the pain of their past. One afternoon, while Clara and the children were sitting in the garden, enjoying the warmth of the sun, Ethan turned to her with a serious expression on his face. He had been quieter than usual, his mind seemingly preoccupied. Mom, he said softly. Do you think we'll ever be happy again? Clara's heart twisted in her chest. Ethan's question was simple, but it carried so much weight. Could they ever truly be happy again, after everything they had been through? I hope so, Clara replied, her voice steady. I believe we can be. But happiness doesn't happen all at once. It's something we work for, something we build together. Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes searching hers. I want to be happy again. I want to feel like I belong. You do belong, Clara said, her voice full of conviction. You belong with me. And with Lily. We're a family, Ethan. We're going to figure this out, no matter how long it takes. Ethan smiled faintly, a glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. Clara's heart swelled with pride. They had a long road ahead of them, but they were on it together. 2. Clara woke early the next morning. The soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains of her room. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. The house was quiet, but in the silence, there was a sense of promise, a feeling that things were finally starting to fall into place. She got up, stretched, and walked to the window, gazing out at the sprawling gardens below. The mansion, once a cold, imposing structure, now felt more like a home, her home. The children had adjusted more than she expected. Ethan was still quiet at times, but the walls between them had begun to crack. Lily, on the other hand, seemed to bounce back with an innocence only a child could have. She would giggle at the smallest things, and her laughter filled the air, lightening the house in ways Clara hadn't thought possible. As she stood there, watching the sun rise, Clara felt a pang of guilt. She still hadn't fully forgiven herself for the time lost, the mistakes made. But she was determined to make the most of the time she had now. She wasn't the same woman she was before. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she knew that, with each step, she would become stronger. For her children, for herself. The door creaked behind her, and she turned to see Ethan standing in the doorway, his eyes tired but searching. Morning, Clara said with a soft smile. Her heart aching at how much she had missed this simple connection. Ethan gave a small nod but didn't move. He was still unsure, still tentative. But there was something in his gaze that told her he wanted to try. Slowly, he stepped inside, and approached the window, standing beside her. Is it always so quiet here? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara chuckled softly, the sound catching in her throat. It can be. But I like it that way. It feels peaceful. Ethan looked at her, his expression serious. I don't know if I can get used to all this. Clara's heart sank. She understood what he meant. This life. This mansion, the luxury, the safety, it was all so different from the life they had before. Ethan wasn't just adjusting to the change in his surroundings. He was adjusting to the idea of having a family again, of trusting her again. I know it's a lot, Clara said gently. But we'll take it one day at a time. I'll be here for you, Ethan. And for Lily. Ethan nodded. His eyes still unsure but softening. I want to believe you. You don't have to believe everything right now. Clara said softly, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Just take it one step at a time. We're in this together. For a moment, they stood there in silence, watching the world outside. Ethan seemed lost in thought, but Clara could feel the small shift in him. The trust wasn't fully there yet, but it was starting to build. Slowly, piece by piece. Later that morning, Clara sat down to breakfast with Ethan and Lily. Richard joined them, as he had every morning since the children arrived. Clara was beginning to appreciate these moments, quiet, simple, and full of promise. The housekeeper, Mrs. Clark, had set the table with pancakes, fruit, and tea. As usual, Lily was chattering away, excited about something she had seen in the garden, while Ethan was quietly poking at his food. Clara caught Richard's eye across the table, and he gave her a slight nod, as if to acknowledge the progress they had made. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. They were making strides. Ethan was quieter than usual, but Clara had learned that sometimes, silence meant progress too. After breakfast, Richard stood up, excusing himself from the table. I need to take care of a few things in the office, but I'll be back later. But Clara smiled and nodded, but before he could leave, Ethan suddenly spoke. Mr. Cole, do you think I could see the garden later? I mean if you're free, of course. Richard paused, clearly surprised. Clara's heart warmed at the request. Ethan had never shown much interest in the mansion's grand surroundings. But today was different. I'd be happy to. Richard said with a smile. Why don't you meet me in the garden after lunch, and we'll take a walk? You can show me your favorite spots. Ethan's face lit up, and Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Ethan was starting to open up. Starting to see Richard not just as the man who was helping them, but as someone he could rely on. After Richard left for his office, Clara took Lily outside to play in the garden. She felt a sense of contentment in the quiet. As if the chaos of the past had finally been replaced with something more stable. The kids were safe, and they were starting to heal. She had so much more to offer them. But she also knew that healing would take time, for all of them. Lily chased after a butterfly, laughing as it flitted away, while Clara sat on a bench nearby, lost in thought. She had never imagined this life, never imagined herself here, in this mansion, surrounded by people who genuinely cared. For so long, she had been alone both physically and emotionally. But now, things were different. She had her children, she had Richard. And most importantly, she had the chance to make things right. Later that afternoon, Clara walked into the study, where Ethan and Richard were sitting, both laughing over something that had happened in the garden. Ethan was holding a small flower in his hand, a gift for Richard, who had patiently listened to Ethan's long-winded explanation of his favorite garden spots. Clara watched from the doorway, a sense of gratitude swelling in her chest. Richard's kindness toward Ethan, and toward her, was something she would never take for granted. Ethan looked up and smiled when he saw her. Mom, look at this flower I found. Clara walked over to him, kneeling down to admire the delicate bloom. It's beautiful, Ethan. You've got a good eye. I thought it might make you smile. Ethan said shyly. Clara's heart melted. It wasn't just about the flower. It was about the gesture. Ethan was beginning to trust her again, and in that moment, she realized how much they had already overcome. Thank you. Clara whispered, brushing her hand through his hair. It's the best gift I could ask for. Richard watched the exchange, his expression warm. It seems like you're making a lot of progress. Clara smiled, her heart full. We're getting there. One step at a time. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small moments that felt big in the way only moments of genuine connection could. Ethan was quieter than usual, but there was a softness in his gaze that hadn't been there before. He was starting to find his way back to her, piece by piece. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she was on the right path. It wasn't perfect, they still had a long way to go. But they were together. And that was what mattered most. 2. It had been a few weeks since Clara's reunion with Ethan and Lily, and while the days were slowly getting easier, Clara knew they had only begun to rebuild the broken pieces of their family. Each day was a fresh challenge, filled with the constant balancing act of giving her children space while still being present, still being the mother they needed. As the morning sun rose, Clara stood in the kitchen, watching as Lily played with her toys on the floor. Ethan had gone out to the garden with Richard, taking small steps toward forming a bond with the man who had become such an important part of their lives. Richard was patient with them, letting them take their time. But Clara could see the quiet connection growing between them. Ethan, once so closed off, was beginning to open up. Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude as she sipped her coffee. This was her life now, and while there were still so many unknowns, she was learning to embrace it. The path wasn't easy, but it was hers to walk, and she wasn't alone anymore. The sound of the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. She set her cup down and walked toward the front door, wondering who could be visiting at this hour. It was unusual for anyone to stop by unannounced, and as she opened the door, she was taken aback by the sight of a familiar face. "Clara," the man said, his voice smooth, yet cold. "It's been a long time." Clara froze. The man standing on her doorstep was none other than Daniel, her ex-husband, the father of Ethan and Lily. The man who had disappeared from their lives years ago without a trace. "Daniel," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. 1,000 emotions rushed through her at once. Anger, disbelief, confusion, and something else she couldn't name. After all these years he had come back. And she didn't know if she was ready for this. "I didn't expect a warm welcome," Daniel said, his eyes scanning the large house behind her. "But I needed to see you. We need to talk." Clara's heart raced, her thoughts scattered. What was he doing here? After everything he had put them through. After abandoning his children, he suddenly appeared on her doorstep. She felt a deep pang of resentment rise up inside her, but she pushed it down. "Why are you here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Daniel looked around again, his expression unreadable. "I came to see Ethan and Lily. I know I have no right to ask, but I need to see them." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "You have no right to see them," she snapped, her anger flaring. "You left us. You walked away from your family when we needed you the most. And now, after all this time, you show up out of nowhere and think you can just waltz back into our lives." Daniel's face softened for a moment. But there was a hardness in his eyes that didn't go unnoticed. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said quietly. "I made a mistake, Clara. I was wrong. And I know I can't undo the past. But I want to be a part of their lives again." Clara's mind raced. She had been holding on to the fragile hope that things might be different this time. That she could rebuild her family. That she could give her children the love and stability they deserved. But now Daniel had thrown that all into turmoil. "You don't get to come back after all these years and pretend like you can make up for everything," Clara said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Ethan and Lily have moved on. They're healing. They don't need you disrupting their lives." Daniel's gaze faltered, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not trying to disrupt their lives, Clara. I'm just asking for a chance. A chance to show them that I can be there for them. A chance to make up for what I did." Clara stood frozen in the doorway, torn between the anger and hurt that had built up over the years, and the faint flicker of hope that Daniel might actually be sincere. She couldn't trust him, not after everything he had done. But there was a part of her that wanted to believe him. It was the same part of her that had once loved him. The part that still wanted to see their family whole. "I need time," Clara said finally, her voice softening. "I need to think about this. I need to talk to Ethan and Lily first. This isn't just about you and me." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand. I'll wait. But I want to be a part of their lives, Clara. Please. Don't shut me out." Clara stared at him for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had come so far in rebuilding her family. She couldn't let Daniel's sudden reappearance unravel everything. But she couldn't just shut the door on him either. He was their father. No matter how much she resented that fact. "I'll talk to you soon," Clara said, her voice firm. She stepped back, closing the door before he could say anything else. Clara leaned against the door, her heart racing. She had done the right thing, hadn't she? She couldn't let him come back into their lives so easily. But how would Ethan and Lily feel about this? How could she explain Daniel's return to them? She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She couldn't let this consume her. She had to stay strong, for her children. That afternoon, Clara sat down with Ethan and Lily. They were playing in the living room, but Clara could tell that Ethan's mind was elsewhere. His usually playful energy was replaced with a quiet tension, and his eyes seemed distant. "Ethan, Lily, I need to talk to you both about something," Clara said, her voice steady but cautious. Ethan looked up at her, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong, Mom?" Clara took a deep breath. She had to be honest. But she didn't want to confuse them. She needed to explain this carefully. "Your father came by today," she said quietly. "Daniel. He wants to be a part of your lives again." Ethan's eyes widened, and Lily stopped playing, looking up at her with a confused expression. "Dad?" Ethan asked, his voice uncertain. Clara nodded. "He wants to see you both. He wants to try and make things right." Ethan stood up slowly, his face a mixture of emotions. "I don't know if I want to see him, Mom. He left us. He left you." Clara felt a sharp pain in her chest at the raw truth in Ethan's words. "I know, Ethan. I know. But I think we need to talk about it. We need to decide what's best for all of us." Ethan remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. Clara's heart broke as she realized just how much pain her children were still carrying. She had to tread carefully. She had to be there for them, no matter what decision they made. But this was a conversation that would take time. It wasn't something that could be solved in a single day. The days that followed Clara's revelation to Ethan and Lily were filled with a strange mix of silence and tension. The mansion, which had started to feel like a home again, was now heavy with uncertainty. Ethan was quiet, his thoughts lingering on the news of his father's return. Lily, too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, had sensed the shift, and though she was still playful, Clara noticed the way her little eyes flickered toward Ethan, sensing his unease. Clara knew this moment was coming. Daniel's reappearance had been inevitable. But she wasn't prepared for how it would affect her children. They had spent so long rebuilding their lives. And now the man who had abandoned them was trying to reinsert himself into their world. It wasn't something she could easily fix. And even though she was determined to make things right, she knew that Ethan and Lily needed time. They had the right to choose whether or not they wanted to let Daniel back in. That evening, after dinner, Clara sat down with Ethan. He was picking at his food. His usual spark of energy nowhere to be found. She noticed the deep lines of worry etched on his face. "Ethan," Clara said softly, reaching for his hand. "I know this is hard." Ethan's eyes remained downcast, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want him to come back, Mom. I don't think I can just forgive him." Clara's heart ached as she squeezed his hand. She knew how much he had suffered from Daniel's absence. How many times he had silently wondered why his father didn't care enough to be there. But she also knew that forgiveness wasn't something she could force onto him. "You don't have to forgive him right away," Clara replied. "And you don't have to make any decisions. It's your choice whether you want to see him again." Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with confusion and hurt. How could he just show up and pretend like everything's okay? He's not just going to walk in and fix everything, right? "No," Clara said firmly, her voice filled with conviction. "He can't fix everything with just an apology. You're right. It doesn't work that way. But you have every right to decide what role he plays in your life. And you don't have to let him back in if you don't want to." Ethan nodded slowly, as if the weight of the decision had just hit him. Clara watched him closely, wishing she could take away his pain. He had been so strong, so resilient, but now, the cracks in his armor were starting to show. "I'm scared, Mom," Ethan admitted quietly, his voice barely audible. Clara leaned in, her heart breaking at the vulnerability in his words. "It's okay to be scared, Ethan. It's okay not to know what to do. You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." Ethan's gaze softened, and for the first time that evening, Clara saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He wasn't ready to forgive Daniel, but he wasn't shutting him out completely either. That, Clara realized, was progress. Till later that night. After Ethan had gone to bed, Clara sat in the study, her thoughts heavy. Daniel's sudden appearance had thrown their fragile world into turmoil. She didn't want to rush Ethan's decision. But she also didn't want to keep the truth from him. He needed to know that she would stand by him, no matter what. Her phone buzzed, and she looked down to see a message from Richard. "We need to talk when you're free." Clara's stomach tightened. She had known that the conversation with Ethan would have consequences. But now Richard's message felt like a summons to face yet another difficult conversation. What did he want to discuss? Was he concerned about Ethan? Or was there something else at play? She took a deep breath and replied, "I'll be in the garden in a few minutes." As she made her way outside, the cool night air washed over her, offering a brief moment of clarity. The moon hung high in the sky, its soft glow casting shadows on the garden below. Clara took a deep breath, trying to clear her mind. But she knew that the peace she craved would not come easily. She had to make decisions, and those decisions would affect her children for the rest of their lives. Richard was waiting for her in the garden, standing beside a small bench near the rose bushes. He looked calm. But Clara could see the concern in his eyes as she approached. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "I know things are difficult right now. But I wanted to talk to you about Daniel. About what happens next." Clara nodded, taking a seat on the bench beside him. "I don't know what to do, Richard. Ethan doesn't want to see him. He's still so hurt, and I don't know if I can force him to forgive someone who left us for so long." Richard sat beside her. His presence warm and reassuring. "You don't have to force Ethan into anything. He needs time. But I think you should consider the bigger picture. I know you don't want to rush things. But Daniel's presence in their lives could help them heal too. It's a difficult choice. But it's one they need to make together." The Clara looked down at her hands, her fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her dress. "I want to believe that. I want to believe that Daniel can change, that he can be a good father. But I'm afraid that, no matter what happens, it won't be enough. Ethan and Lily might never forgive him for abandoning them." Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. "Clara, you can't change the past. No one can. But you can help your children move forward. This is about them finding peace with what happened, even if it takes time. And it's about you too. You deserve to be able to move forward, without carrying the weight of the past." The Clara nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She had been so focused on the past, on Daniel's mistakes, that she had forgotten about the future. The future she was trying to build with her children. The future that was still within reach. Despite the pain they had all endured. "I don't know if I'm ready to let him back in," Clara said, her voice soft. "But I want to do what's best for Ethan and Lily. I want them to feel safe, to feel loved, no matter what happens." Richard smiled at her. His eyes filled with understanding. "You're doing what's best, Clara. You're giving them the space to decide for themselves. That's all you can do." Clara looked out at the garden, her thoughts swirling as she considered the future. She didn't have all the answers. But one thing was certain. She would not let Daniel's return disrupt the fragile peace they had built. Ethan and Lily would decide for themselves. And Clara would be there to support them, no matter where their paths led. 2. The days following Clara's conversation with Richard were filled with a quiet tension. The house, which had once been filled with laughter and light, now seemed quieter than ever. Ethan and Lily had retreated into themselves, still processing the idea of their father's return. Clara knew it was a difficult time for both of them, but she also knew that they needed to face their fears, their anger, and their pain if they were ever going to move forward. Clara spent the next few days focusing on helping them heal. Ethan had become more withdrawn, retreating to the corners of the house, hiding behind his books or drawing in his sketch pad. Lily, on the other hand, seemed to sense the weight of the situation but didn't fully grasp its gravity. She clung to Clara more than ever, seeking comfort in the only thing she knew: her mother's presence. Despite the growing distance between herself and Ethan, Clara made sure to check in with him daily. Even if it was just a simple conversation in passing. She didn't want to force him into talking. But she also wanted him to know that she was there for him whenever he was ready. It was late one afternoon when Ethan approached Clara as she was sitting on the porch, watching Lily play in the yard. He stood at the edge of the garden, his eyes fixed on the ground. "Mom," he said, his voice soft and unsure, "can we talk?" Clara looked up at him, her heart lifting with a mixture of relief and concern. She patted the space beside her on the bench. "Of course, Ethan. Come sit with me." He slowly made his way to the bench, sitting down a little further away than usual. Clara could see the hesitation in his movements, the internal struggle that had been building up in him for days. She waited patiently, allowing him to find the words he needed. "I've been thinking about what you said," Ethan began after a long pause. "About Daniel. About whether I should see him or not." Clara nodded, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't know where this conversation would lead, but she was ready to listen. "And what do you think?" Ethan looked down at his hands, his fingers tightly gripping the fabric of his jeans. "I don't know if I'm ready to see him, Mom. I don't even know if I want to see him. But I think I need to understand why he left. I need to know why he came back." Clara's heart swelled with emotion. She hadn't expected him to open up so soon, but she was glad he was starting to process his feelings. He wasn't ready to forgive Daniel yet, but this was progress. "Ethan, you don't have to see him if you're not ready. But I think it's okay to ask those questions. You deserve answers," Clara said gently. Ethan nodded slowly, his face still filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive him for what he did. I don't know if I can. But I don't want to live with this anger forever. It's like there's this knot in my chest that won't go away." Clara took a deep breath. She had been carrying her own version of that knot for years. The anger and confusion that came from being abandoned by the one person who was supposed to protect her family. But now, she understood something important. Healing didn't come from holding on to that anger. It came from understanding, from letting go. "You don't have to forgive him right away," Clara said, her voice steady. "But you don't have to carry that knot in your chest, either. Holding on to anger only hurts you in the end. And Ethan, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'll be here for you. You're not alone in this." Ethan looked up at her then, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "I don't want to feel like this anymore, Mom. I want to feel like I'm not carrying this weight around all the time." Clara reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, her heart breaking at the vulnerability in his words. "Then let's work on it together. We'll take it one step at a time. You don't have to do it alone." For the first time in weeks, Ethan gave her a small, tentative smile. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a step forward. A little later that evening, as Clara prepared dinner, she couldn't shake the weight of the conversation she had just had with Ethan. He wasn't ready to forgive Daniel. But he was ready to start understanding. And that, she realized, was all she could ask for right now. She had spent so long trying to protect her children from the pain of their past. But she couldn't shield them from it forever. They had to face it on their own terms. In their own time. After dinner, Clara and Ethan went for a walk around the garden. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the flowers and the trees. Ethan walked quietly beside her, his hands stuffed in his pockets. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them felt comfortable now. There was no pressure. No urgency. Just the two of them, walking together, finding their way back to each other. As they reached the far end of the garden, Clara stopped and turned to him. "Ethan, I know this is hard. And I know you're still processing everything. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Proud of how strong you've been. And how far you've come. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just know that I'm here. And I always will be." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of doubt. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. I don't know what the right thing is, Mom. But I'll figure it out. I'll take it one step at a time. Just like you said. Clara smiled, her heart swelling with love for her son. That's all anyone can do, Ethan. Take it one step at a time. That night, as Clara lay in bed, her mind kept returning to the conversation with Ethan. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy. But it was a start. They were moving forward together. And that was all she could ask for. The road ahead was still uncertain. But one thing was clear. She had her children by her side, and they would face whatever came next as a family. The days seemed to flow more smoothly after the conversation with Ethan. Clara could sense a shift in him, a softening that hadn't been there before. He was still cautious, still guarded, but there was a new openness, a willingness to move forward. And that was enough for now. Clara knew that healing took time. But she also knew that they were all in this together. It wasn't just about fixing the broken parts. It was about building something new, something stronger. Something built on understanding, patience and love. As time passed, Ethan slowly began to open up. He started talking more about his feelings. About the confusion and anger he had carried for so long. And Clara listened. She didn't try to fix him or push him to forgive. She just listened. Offering him the space to work through his emotions in his own time. Lily, too, had adjusted. Though still too young to understand the full scope of what had happened. She had begun to show more trust in Clara and Ethan. She would often sit with them, playing quietly or chattering about her day. Her innocence offering a kind of comfort that couldn't be explained. One afternoon, Richard came over to the house. Clara had invited him. Knowing that they needed to discuss what had been happening with Daniel. There was a sense of finality in the air, a conclusion that had yet to be reached. As Richard sat down at the kitchen table with Clara, Ethan and Lily, he looked around the room, taking in the quiet atmosphere. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with concern. Clara met his gaze, her heart full. "Better," she said simply. "It's not perfect, but we're making progress." Ethan, who had been sitting quietly at the table, finally spoke. His voice was steady, and for the first time in a while, there was a sense of resolve in his words. "I've been thinking about what you said, Richard. About forgiveness. And I think I'm ready to see him. I don't know if I'll ever forgive him completely. But I need to know why he left. I need to understand." Richard smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "That's a big step, Ethan. And it's your choice. But I think it's the right one." Clara's heart swelled with emotion. Ethan had come so far in such a short time, and she couldn't have been prouder of him. He was learning to process his pain, to confront his fears, and to move forward in his own way. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about healing. And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt like she was seeing the future clearly again. Later that day, they made the decision to meet Daniel. It wasn't easy. And it wasn't something that Clara did lightly. But she knew it was the right choice, for Ethan, for Lily, and for herself. They had to face the past in order to truly embrace the future. Daniel was waiting at a small cafe. A neutral ground where the tension could at least feel a little less suffocating. Clara sat across from him, Ethan beside her, his expression unreadable. Lily sat quietly in her lap, playing with a small toy. Daniel's eyes scanned the table, meeting Clara's gaze for the first time in years. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just need you to know that I'm sorry. I was weak. And I left when I shouldn't have." Ethan's eyes hardened at the words. But Clara could see the quiet battle raging within him. He was torn between his anger and his desire to understand. It wasn't an easy thing to ask of a young boy, but it was a necessary one. The truth was never easy. Especially when it was wrapped in regret and broken promises. "I don't know what I expected from you," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "But, I think I needed to hear that. I needed to hear you say you're sorry." Daniel nodded, his face a mixture of relief and sorrow. "I know it doesn't change anything. But I'm sorry, Ethan. I'll never be able to undo what I did. I can't make it right. But I want to try." Clara reached over and placed a hand on Ethan's arm, offering him a silent but powerful support. Ethan didn't respond immediately. His gaze still fixed on Daniel. But after a moment, he looked at his mother, his eyes softening. He was struggling. But Clara could see that he was beginning to let go of some of the anger that had weighed him down for so long. "Thanks for saying that," Ethan said finally. His voice steady. "It doesn't fix everything. But it helps." Clara smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. This was a turning point for both of them. One that could never erase the past but could allow them to move forward, free from the burden of resentment. As they left the cafe, Ethan seemed lighter. Not completely healed, not yet, but lighter. Clara knew there would still be hard days ahead, but they had made progress, together. That evening, as Clara tucked Ethan and Lily into bed, she stood at their door for a moment, just watching them sleep. She had come so far. They had all come so far. The journey wasn't over, and there would be more struggles, more hurdles to overcome. But for the first time in years, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. They were healing, they were rebuilding, and they were doing it together. As Clara turned off the lights and closed the door softly behind her, she couldn't help but smile. The future wasn't perfect, it wasn't guaranteed. But it was theirs to shape, and they had the strength to face whatever came next. Together. And in that moment Clara knew that everything would be okay. 2 months passed and Clara, Ethan, and Lily began to settle into their new normal. There were still hard days, but the pain of the past slowly started to fade. Ethan had grown more confident. And Lily's laughter filled the house in a way that made everything feel whole again. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Ethan looked at Clara with a seriousness in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "Mom," he said, his voice steady, "I'm glad you didn't give up on us." "On me?" Clara smiled, her heart swelling with love. "I'll never give up on you, Ethan. Not now, not ever." Ethan nodded, his eyes softening. "I know. And I think I'm ready to forgive him." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She had waited for this moment. But hearing it from Ethan's mouth made it all the more real. "We don't have to forget what happened," Clara said softly. "But we can move forward. Together." Ethan smiled, his face lighting up with a sense of peace Clara hadn't seen before. It wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about finding strength in their family. And in that moment, Clara knew they had finally truly found their way home. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and let us know what you learned by commenting below. If you've had a similar experience, don't forget to share it. Thank you for giving us your valuable time.